The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's Policy in Practice webinar. My name is Janet Harkin, and I'm delighted to welcome so many of you here today. The webinar is titled Welfare Reform, What's the True Impact on each of your tenants and your rental income? And it's great to have you here today. And before we start, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping, just to also give a little bit more time for any stragglers. So we can do some housekeeping. So if I may, can I do an audio check by asking you to raise your digital hand in the panel on the right-hand side to you. And while you're doing that, just to let you know that we like for you to ask questions throughout the webinar. There'll be a chance at the end where we will pick up the questions and put them through to our speakers, but do feel free to ask the questions as they come along to you. Also, in the panel on the right-hand side, you will see that there are some handouts that you can download. So please do take a look at those. And we will have we also have a couple of surveys at the end of the webinar, plus a survey which we'd ask you to complete for us, just to give us a bit of feedback. We will have you on your way by 11:30. And thank you very much to everybody who's raised your hands. I'm delighted that you can hear me. So today's speakers are Adam Knight-Markiegi from Policy in Practice and Zoe Charlesworth from Policy in Practice. Just a little bit about Adam and Zoe before they introduce themselves to you. Adam is our Head of Operations at Policy in Practice, and he has 15 years under his belt in the housing sector in policy, research and consultancy, and he's always worked with local authorities and housing associations, and so a lot of experience in this area. His last role was at Housemark, which an organisation some of you may be aware of, and he's very familiar with housing data and the challenges facing the sector. Adam joined Policy in Practice recently because he's keen to help people understand policy on the front line so that they can help improve people and residents' lives. He wants to turn insight from the analysis into practical steps on the ground. And we'll talk a little bit about that today and give some examples of that. Zoe is our Policy and Product Manager here at Policy in Practice. Zoe has worked in the field of revenues and benefits since 1985. She's worked for many years as a benefits manager for Reading Borough Council and the Vale of Whitehorse District Council. And she was also Principal Benefits Training Manager for London Borough of Lambeth. Following her years with local authorities, Zoe worked as a senior consultant for the Association of District Councils Information Systems. She's published a wide variety of reports and books on local authority business, including Common Housing Registers and IT Guide, which was published by the Institute of Housing, Local Authority Remote Site Surveillance, published by the LGA, and the CCT Directory, published by the LGA also. And she was the editor of the LGA publication, The Fraud Book. So huge experience here with our speakers today. So do please get your difficult questions ready for them. So today's agenda, I'll just quickly run through. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a brief introduction to Policy in Practice, and then we're going to talk about the problems faced by one of our clients, Your Homes Newcastle, and give you an overview of the approach that we took with them to help them solve some of the challenges that they were facing. We're going to take you through some of the key findings from the analysis we did for them and take a little look at the software that enabled us to do that. And then we're going to talk about the difference that we're making, and more importantly, our clients are able to make because of the work that we're doing. So a little bit then about Policy in Practice. So for those of you who don't know us, we make the welfare system simple to understand so that people can make the decisions that are right for them. That is the thing that gets us out of bed in the morning. And how do we do that? Well, Policy in Practice, it's a social policy, software and consulting business. And we were founded by Donna Gallagher, who many of you may have heard of. And Devon was part of the team that developed universal credit at the Centre for Social Justice. And when universal credit was adopted, Devon saw that as a unique opportunity that not many policy people have, which is to actually put their idea into practice. So he decided he could either move on to writing the next policy report, or he could try and make universal credit work on the ground. And indeed, that's what he did. He founded Policy in Practice to address the gap between the policy intent and the policy delivery. So we do three different things to achieve this, as illustrated by this diagram that you see here. We do policy research, and we work with organisations such as the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, Financial Inclusion Commission. We also do consultancy work, mostly for local authorities and housing associations, to help them better understand the impact of welfare reform on their residents and their customers, and to help them develop their own support schemes and their own understanding. We also have a range of outcome-based software tools like our Universal Benefit and Budgeting Calculator that helps clients to be more effective in supporting residents and delivering the policy intent. And before I move on to handing over to Adam, just a quick plug on behalf of Radio 4, the Money Box programme. Devon is speaking this afternoon he's lined up to speak at 3 o'clock on the Money Box programme, and he's asked me to ask you to tell him what he should talk about. He's asked a question specifically: what do you think is the biggest problem that your residents face when dealing with the benefit system? And Devon would love to hear your feedback. So please do pop your answer to that question in the panel on the right-hand side. And Devon would be very grateful. And now I'm going to hand over to Adam. Over to you, Adam.
That's great. Lovely. Thanks very much then, Janet. And great to be talking to people today in really my first webinar at Policy in Practice. And what I wanted to do is just to kind of show, to a certain extent, what some of that complexity of the welfare system is, and you will know that from your work day to day, but also what we're trying to do in trying to make the welfare system as simple as possible. Now, we all know that that the reforms that we've already had, and the reforms that are set going right through till April 2020, we've got some negative ones, those in red, but we've got some positive ones as well, maybe to cushion the blow. And just to kind of pick out some of these, although this is in your handout as well on the right-hand side. Some of the positive ones are kind of higher personal tax allowance this year, but also going through to April 2020, and also move to the national living wage for those aged 25 and over, and even kind of increases to the minimum wage rates for kind of younger people, kind of 16 to 24-year-olds, and another change there, coming in right in the 1st of October. Now, this may be controversial to a housing audience, but from a tenant's point of view, the rents going down by 1% each year for the next 4 years can be seen as positive. Now, we understand actually that that's quite a big impact for organisations, and I was speaking to Alliance Homes in the Southwest earlier this year, and they were making 11% of their staff redundant at the beginning of the year because of that 1% rent cut. So, we appreciate that actually that's a very negative impact, and that's allied to some of the other changes that we see. So, for example, the ongoing kind of move towards universal credit, although probably less generous than Devon and the Centre for Social Justice kind of anticipated early on, set out, that carries on. Clearly, a big impact for housing in terms of direct payments to the tenants rather than you as landlords. We've also seen some of these in red, that we've got a freeze on benefit levels for the next 4 years. We have a lower benefit cap coming in from this autumn, from November, and that we're seeing will have a much wider effect across the country. So not just in London and the South East, but actually across the whole of the whole country. Some other highlights or lowlights, you may say, pay to stay coming in, particularly for kind of council housing. We've also got, and I think this is probably quite a big impact for you, particularly for younger tenants, the local housing allowance coming in for social tenancies. So that's, won't be here till April 2018, so that's for new tenants, starting from this April. And of course, for those under 35, they will be limited to the shared accommodation rate. So, conversations we've had with housing providers, we know that that's quite a biggie. Clearly, against all of this, and in line with that, there's a big emphasis on value for money. The regulator is still pushing for that. And so efficiencies, mergers, that's still the name of the game. What I want to do, though, is to move on to look at some of the work quite specifically we did for Your Homes Newcastle in conjunction with Newcastle City Council. And it was great that we're able to do that in partnership, that they were working together and working with us as well. Your Homes Newcastle, YHN, is an award-winning ALMO responsible for 27,000 homes on behalf of Newcastle Council. So, it's a good-sized landlord operating in North East England. Clearly, they're facing that onslaught, all of those changes to the welfare system. And they've worked with us to understand that, both at an organisation level for Your Homes Newcastle, at a citywide level for Newcastle City Home. But as we'll come on to, the real power of that of our work, of our analysis, is looking at the impact right down to the individual level. So they faced a kind of a trio of problems. They knew from their work, from YHN in particular, Your Homes Newcastle, that out of that 27,000 tenants, almost half of those, 12,000 tenants, so a big number, could move on to universal credit. So clearly, single people and new claims to begin with, but then moving over to a big number of their working age tenants. They knew that there was a big impact because of this. So not just a change of benefits, rolling them into universal credit and staff and their residents having to understand it, but also clearly with the direct payments, there's a risk to the organisation in terms of increased rent arrears, and we have seen that from the pilot and some of the early kind of UC rollout. But they would also need to have increased demand on their services and their specialist support services. So Donna Gallagher, YHN's Universal Credit Implementation Manager, quite clearly said everyone's going to have to provide a little bit of support, benefits and budgeting advice. It's not just one aspect of that, but it's all of that rolled into one. And I know, again, from my work in housing, that frontline housing officers are having to deal with more and more of these issues. Not just specialist teams, it is everybody on the front line, and that can be coupled with other debts, with arrears elsewhere, with money sharks kind of knocking on the door, and sometimes increasingly with mental health problems. So, there's a real challenge for housing organisations. And the challenges that YHN, Newcastle City Council faced, it's three really. They wanted to understand the impact of welfare reform for themselves. It's a complex picture. How does the bedroom tax look like? What impact will there be with the benefit cap, with universal credit, with the lower LHA rate, for example, and all of that combined? But also importantly, how do they support tenants? They had gone from a situation where using pen and paper, tenants were having to explain their situation, their finances, their income and expenditure from one member of staff to another. That's quite frustrating, having to repeat yourself from a tenant's point of view, but also a waste of time and resources from staff, because the information has already been collected once. It just happens to be on paper rather than digitally and able to be shared among colleagues. So clear kind of need for efficiencies. I've not already mentioned value for money, but I think universal credit and direct payments and the 1% rent cut, push that, the need for efficiencies even more. So what did they want to do then? YHN, ideally, what they wanted to do was to be able to see right down to the household level. So, Mrs. Biggins at 73 Acacia Avenue will be affected by all welfare changes to the tune of £15.62 per week. So that builds up over the year, but per week, particularly universal credit, and she has low barriers to work. So bringing in, and again, allied to universal credit, the idea of understanding down to the individual level, but helping people into work to improve their situations. So what have we done? What were the solutions that Policy and Practice is able to provide? And there's two, really. There's smart analysis, particularly the welfare reform impact analysis, and I'll be talking more about that in a second. And also some powerful software, a universal benefit and budgeting calculator. My colleague Zoe will be talking about that in a little while. So starting with the smart analysis. I'm coming from Housemark, where it was very rich with data, but a lot of the KPIs, and some of you may be responsible for compiling them are quite top level. What really impresses me about the work at Policy and Practice is that really fine-tune household level data and a very rich data that we can get from working in partnership between local authorities and housing organisations. So what's our approach then? How do we do this? How do we get to that household level data? So again, that partnership working is so important because it allows us to get some housing benefit data and council tax data from the local authority, so Newcastle City Homes in this case, but powerfully to combine that with some of the data from the housing association themselves, from YHN, from the ALMO, looking at arrears here. And we've done similar work in Walsall, with Walsall Housing Group, and with the Accord Group. We've done similar work with Housing Partners and London Boroughs. So, this partnership working, the data sharing really can work, and there are some good examples out there. So you can imagine that rich source, that data, that, tens of thousands of rows of data, that can be quite hard to interpret. It's quite hard to look forward, to understand the impact of welfare changes to come. It's not just what we have already, but going forward. We're able to combine that data with our powerful universal benefit calculator to come out with a very rich and a detailed impact assessment to understand who is impacted and what are the citywide effects. And also, for here, what are the effects, what is the impact for YHN? And that helps with decision making because you've got local data and very clear insights. So, for example, who will be affected by the lower benefit cap? Are they in arrears already? So you can help to kind of target resources. So you can see that impact and that impact rolling forward right through to 2020. So households that may be affected now and maybe continue to be affected in the future. So this is some of the charts. I want to show a few of them from the work that we did, particularly with YHN and their tenants. So a big one for housing organisations clearly is the bedroom tax, the under occupation charge, the spare room subsidy, whatever we call it. And these two charts show those households that are affected by that. So this is a reform that's already in place and their characteristics. So the household type and the economic status. So on the left-hand side, we see the pie chart there showing by household type. And you can see the biggest one there, kind of in mustard yellow, 61% of those affected by the bedroom tax are single. Maybe that's not, a huge surprise. That's 3 out of 5 of those affected because, they may well have those extra bedrooms. There may be kind of a family members may have moved out. Children have grown up, gone to college, moved away. But actually, households with children still make up 27%. That's the red one, lone parent, and the blue one combined. So 27% in total. That's over 1 in 4 of the households affected by the bedroom tax do have children. Flicking to the other side is looking at the economic status. And this is probably where it shows even more powerfully working together and having combined data. So not just data in isolation from a housing association or a local authority, but looking at that together. And this is probably a richer source for the housing providers there among you. This is probably a richer source and more alive, more updated than a lot of your housing management systems would have right now. So there you can see just briefly that 52%, so just over half, are not in work affected by the bedroom tax and because of disability. But the power of our analysis also shows where there should be exempt households. So for example, we've identified 13 pension-age households who shouldn't be affected by the bedroom tax, but do seem to be. So again, this helps YHN to pinpoint those households, and it's very easy to go and speak to them and hopefully to get them out of being limited by the bedroom tax. So just moving on then to look at another chart. And this one compares households affected by the benefit cap. So those that are affected by the benefit cap already, so those in arrears, the high benefit cap, and we know from our analysis that there's a bigger impact in London and the South East. But as you can see just from this chart alone, those blue lines, those blue bars, but also from other work we've done, actually the lower benefit cap will bring in many more households. And you can see the huge difference from the greens to the blues. From left, 112 households will have their benefit caps And again, for Newcastle and much of the country, that's £20,000 for families, children, and £13,400 for single people. Clearly, if you're in London, those levels will go up to 23 for households with children. But here in Newcastle, and for YHN, you move along those blue lines right through to the 50 on the right-hand side. So that's 50 households that will have their benefit capped, so primarily from housing benefits, over £100 every single week. That really builds up every month. That builds up every year. So that's a huge sum. And, you know, I think inevitably that will lead to higher rent arrears. So it'll have a big, big impact. And again, you know, we've been able to kind of highlight households that probably should be exempt or may well be exempt. So, for example, those on working tax credits or in paid work or in receipt of qualifying disability-related benefits should be exempt from the benefit cap. And even on the lower figures, so those green lines, those green bars, we've seen that 12 out of those 44 are on disability benefits and should be exempt. You know, that will rise even more with the blue ones. So our analysis down to that household level can really be powerful, not just to show this picture with this chart, to show to members, to show to the board members and to staff, but also to do something about it. So I just want to kind of read out a quote, and again from YHN. So this one is from Donna Gallagher. So she is the Universal Credit Implementation Manager. And just about how the analysis has helped them. So we've matched the data set back to our rent accounts and identified groups of people we can now work with on specific things. We can now proactively reach out to people in a preventative way. That really shows the power there. And actually all of the analysis showed a substantial 7-figure sum of rental income that was at risk because of the lower benefit cap. So it can help at the organisational level and identify preventative measures, being proactive about it, but also being proactive at that household level. That's lovely. I'd now like to pass over to Zoe.
Thanks, Adam. Adam looked at how an understanding of welfare reform assists organisation in protecting the rental income. I'm going to look at the importance of the understanding of welfare reform at the frontline level amongst your housing officers and tenants, because that is the level at which mitigation can occur. We recognise that one of the most powerful ways to protect rental income is through maximising tenant income and through customer engagement with the impact of welfare reforms. We also recognise that customer support is at the heart of your business, whether you're a local authority or a housing association, and it's on the back of that support that you do day to day that customer engagement can occur. The software I'm going to talk about, the Universal Benefit Calculator, is a tool that can assist tenants in understanding the impact of welfare reform, and it's very useful for housing officers and providing support to tenants. If we go outside the welfare reform arena, it's a powerful tool in its own right to enable tenants to maximise entitlement and to understand how benefits and behaviour have an impact on their household income. But I'm not going to be looking at it in depth today. I'm just going to be using it as an illustration of how a software tool can support engagement with welfare reform and therefore minimise the risk to your rental income. There are a few features, though, of the calculator that I'd like to bring out. As I said, I'm not going into in depth with the calculator. I'm not going to be running through screens and things. But a few of these features are quite important in order to get clients to engage. The points we've got here on this slide that's in front of you are ones that we've brought together from feedback, actually, from people who are using the system. The calculator and the software is fast and it's easy to use. And this is important. For some large housing associations and local authorities, the number of people impacted negatively by welfare reform can be in the thousands. I know you will be prioritising these people and deciding who are the people you need to engage with first. But for each of these people, you're looking at a one-to-one interview, a one-to-one discussion. And you need to be able to do this quickly. We've tried within the calculator to ensure that you only complete data based on the characteristics of the household, which means that your tenants and your officers supporting your tenants aren't going through pages and pages of data input that's not necessary. The calculator is also engaging, and this is vital to ensure tenants actually engage with the impact of welfare reform. We have visuals within the calculator. The tenants can actually see the impact of universal credit and how this will affect their household income. They can see how going to work will affect their household income. They can see how working a few extra hours can affect their household income. And these are all shown in comparison in colourful graphs to current situations. It's a very comprehensive benefit calculator. It covers all the current means tested benefits in and out of work. So employment support allowance, job seekers allowance, income support, housing benefit, council tax support, working tax credits, other tax credits including the pensioner tax credit, but it also includes universal credit. And through the calculator, households can see the difference in benefit support they'll receive under universal credit and the current scheme. It's also comprehensive in another way, in that we've actually got a couple of versions of the calculator, one for tenants to use by themselves, which is quite simplified, but one for staff. And the staff one has regulatory guidance. And this is quite important in looking at eligibility. In order to maximise tenants' income, we need to know if they're eligible for benefits in order so that we can point them in the right direction. And also within the benefit system, there are choices of benefits occasionally to be made, and this is particularly true of those reaching pension age or in couples. But a simple example is if somebody has carer's allowance, the person they're caring for loses one of the disability premiums in their housing benefit. So the calculator allows your housing officers to look at both scenarios and maximise the income to the tenant. And one of the key features of this software is its outcome focus, and this is one of the key objectives in the development of the software. On the slide in front of you, we've got it says that it's aimed at encouraging people into work, and that's quite powerful within the software, because the tenant can visualise through simple graphs and bar charts the household income in work and out of work. But obviously for all tenants, the outcome is not work. It may be behavioural change, it may be budgeting. For some, it may just be ensuring that the benefit entitlement is maximised. In all of these, the calculator helps the officer who's looking to support your tenants. There's a budgeting calculator as part of the calculator, and this allows your housing officer to move seamlessly from benefit entitlement to assisting with budgeting and discussion of behavioural change. And we've also got links in there that if the outcome is to maximise benefits, you can link to the supplier of those benefits immediately, whether it's HMRC, DWP or the local authority. And I think one of the important things in ensuring that your tenants engage is this absolute seamless movement from looking at benefit entitlement to the outcome. You're not going to a second bit of software for budgeting. You're not looking up separately where people should be applying for benefits. It can all be done in one conversation. As I mentioned, the calculator can be used directly by your clients, or it can be used by officers supporting clients. And so it therefore fits with the digital by default agenda. And we do realise that many clients of both local authorities and housing associations will require support, and that customer support is a key role for both local authorities and housing associations. And it's on the back of this support that customer engagement with welfare reform occurs, and it's that engagement that can lead to mitigation of any negative impacts. If I just move on to the next slide, there's just a couple more features of the software that I'd just like to bring to your attention. I'm just waiting for my, there we go, yeah. that are actually helpful in customer engagement. The calculator works offline, and this is extremely helpful for housing officers. It can be used for home visits, and particularly in rural areas. But a lot of home visits, a lot of one-to-one conversations will be needed in order to mitigate impacts of welfare reform and to ensure that engagement's occurring. So the offline feature is very useful. The calculator can be customised. This means that the tenants can recognise it as being part of your housing association or local authority. And throughout the calculator, whether it's being used by the tenant directly or by your officer, there's built-in help and live chat. So if a tenant is trying to help themselves but needs a bit of welfare advice, we're on the other end of the phone. And it uses colour and visuals to engage the tenant. Sorry, Janet, can I have the next slide?
Yes.
Thank you. I just want to look a bit further at customer engagement, because this is key to mitigating the impacts of welfare reform and protecting rental incomes. And the software provides customer-focused illustrations of the impact of welfare reforms. And advisors don't need to be policy experts to explain the welfare system and what the changes will mean. And that means that the tenants can engage directly through these frontline conversations. I've got some illustrations here of ways that the software can be used to help your tenants engage. An example is that it can show a customer how they'll be impacted by the benefit cap and how a change to working additional hours can impact on household income. And this is quite powerful. They see side by side that by working a few more hours, that drop-off that happens with the benefit cap doesn't occur. And with the benefit cap, visuals are very, very important because there is that cliff edge. And actually, I was visiting a housing association, and they mentioned that they had been to see a client, and they were using the calculator actually to have these conversations with their clients about the benefit cap. And they had shown a single mother how her income would drop off under the new benefit cap because she wasn't working enough hours to be exempt. And they had a phone call a couple of days later that she'd taken her husband back because they were now, so that they could have enough hours to be exempt from the cap. So the powerful visual illustration was shown to her, let us see the impact of having somebody in the household working. I have no idea about marriage worked out, but it's quite interesting to see how important, how the reaction of the tenant to the visual illustration. The software can also compare the current system and universal credit side by side to enable customers to budget for future changes. And this is extremely important for your self-employed tenants. And we know from our work with local authorities and housing associations that the number of self-employed tenants, tenants varies enormously between areas. And I've seen some research that suggests this is down to how proactive the local JCPs were in suggesting self-employment to unemployed people. But obviously, under universal credit, the self-employed are going to be, their benefit is going to be calculated on the minimum income floor. And they're not going to have the transitional protection that's going to be available to your employed tenants. So for your self-employed tenants, there is going to be a big cliff edge drop in income. And this could well have an impact on rental income. So it'd probably be very useful to have one-to-one conversations with your self-employed claimants and show their current benefit income and the universal credit income side by side in order for them to prepare for the introduction of universal credit. And I do know from working with quite a few of our customers that a lot of local authorities and housing associations are already doing this. The calculator provides very simple illustrations of income against household outgoings, and so provides an introduction to discussions of possible actions that the tenant can take to mitigate shortfall. And from working with housing associations and local authorities, we do know that this is one of the areas that the frontline officers find most beneficial. Discussion of budgeting is always problematic. The tenants don't want to discuss budgeting. It's a very difficult conversation to open. And the seamless nature of the calculator, moving straight from looking at the claimant's benefit entitlement to budgeting, means that the conversation is opened up automatically, and it just makes it easier to have that conversation and therefore mitigate any shortfall. Just move to the next slide. Yeah, actually, this is a very nice quote here from YHN. They've been using the calculator to assist their tenants in drawing up action plans for behavioural change. And the quote says, the action plan isn't just words, it's visual. If someone isn't improving their circumstances, we've got something in place to review with them and look at their support options. And I think this illustrates very well the importance of the engagement at frontline level, and how it's at this frontline level that the mitigation of the impacts will occur. Thanks, Janet. Can we move to the next one? Just a quick overview of the importance of understanding the impacts of welfare reform and how this feeds into minimising risk to rental income. It enables a preventative approach for the organisation, and allows better targeted support to residents who need it most, preventing some from being affected and softening the impact on others. And it's interesting that I can't think of the title of the JRF report, but a JRF report I read fairly recently, and I'll look up the title if anybody wants it, get in contact with me, mentioned the just managing. Those tenants who haven't come to your attention yet, they're paying their rent, they're paying their council tax, but they're managing to great detriment to the household. They're managing by food banks, by not eating, by turning off lights. And the work we've done with local authorities, and one particular London borough, showed that the DHPs of the local authority have been aligned with the impacts of welfare reform. So 85% of people who've been impacted by welfare reform changes were getting a DHP. But what the analysis also showed them was that a very, very high percentage of those who had been impacted had not even applied for DHP. So there was a story there. They were either coping, or there was circumstances that hadn't been reported. And that London Borough will be prioritising those households to see if support is needed. So it allows you to see that people you haven't actually reached out to yet. It allows you to understand the potential implication of welfare reform on your balance sheet. And as Adam mentioned, and there's point 3 because it's so important on this slide, one housing association identified a 7-figure sum of rental income, which is at risk from 500 households that are most affected by lower benefit cap. And that's huge. And obviously that will have impact on the whole business of the housing association. Impact analysis also allows an understanding of the also allows resource planning, especially around support. And this differs between local authorities and housing associations. Within local authorities, we've been doing work with some local authorities and looking at how the DHPs fit with welfare reform impact, and using discretionary support to mitigate the worst effects. We've also we're undertaking some modelling at the moment, haven't yet been completed, where we're going to be looking at creating a CTRS scheme that, in an attempt to not affect negatively those who have most been hit by welfare reform. So within housing associations, the resource planning is mostly around the use of officers, but by seeing how many people you will need to have conversations with, you can plan for the discussions that will inevitably be needed. A preventative approach also informs joint working between local authorities and housing associations, and Adam gave a very, very good example of that earlier in the presentation. And this enables mitigation and preparation for impacts. A local authority I visited recently is using the impact analysis that we produced for them to pinpoint the number of under 35s in social rented sector who will be hit by the LHA. And this is really important for both organisations, because from the local authority point of view, a lot of those under 35s were placed there from the homelessness register, and the local authority had an obligation to those people. And if the housing association could no longer house these people, the local authority had to look at other measures. From the housing association point of view, although their current under 35s were going to be protected, it would have impact. It would have an impact on whether they were going to take those type of tenants in the future. And so the information we provided in the analysis allowed an informed discussion on whether there was going to be top-up contracts with the local authorities and around housing associations charging for the under 35s. Those discussions were going to have to take place, but it was the local authority found it very useful that they could go into those discussions informed on the actual impact. At a frontline level, your housing office if your housing officers understand the impact of individual reforms on each tenant they're seeing and the combined impact of reforms, they can help those residents understand the impact of welfare reform and engage with support for that, with support with dealing with that impact, and whether that's behavioural change, work, or ensuring entitlement is maximised. I think that's all I've got to say at the moment. I'm just going to pass over to Janet, who's got a few more things she'd like to talk to you about.
Thank you very much, Zoe, and thank you, Adam, as well. Very comprehensive walkthrough. I've got a couple of polls before we pause for questions, which I'd like to serve now, if I may. So the first one is coming up on your screen shortly. I think it should be there now. So this poll is asking what you consider is going to be the biggest impact on your organisation, which benefit change is going to have the biggest impact. So please vote away now, and we will look at the results shortly. And as you are all voting, if we haven't covered one of the options there, there is an option to say something else. We don't presume that we know it all. So if there is another option that you think is going to have the biggest impact, do drop it into the comments panel, and we will talk about that. So I'm thinking, just give you a couple more minutes to place your votes, and I think that will do us now. That's fantastic. Thank you. So I'm going to just close that poll, and then I am going to aim to share the screen so you can see how everybody has voted. So I think overwhelmingly universal credit seems to be the one that is going to have the most impact on you as an organisation. A quarter of it say the LHA cap, and 13% on the benefit cap changes. Adam, Zoe, any comments on those results that have come through?
No, well, thanks for voting there. I think that would kind of chime with conversations we've had with other housing providers, that the direct payments, the universal credit and the direct payment for the overwhelming majority of tenants that are moving on to universal credit, that is going to have a big impact. We know, from the pilots that happened in universal credit in housing and from the early rollout that is leading to arrears. Now, I know that housing organisations have tailor their support and change some of their support and how they have conversations and which tools they use to have conversations with customers. But I can understand why that is such a big one. And clearly the next one, the local housing allowance being capped for social rents, and in particular, how that will affect kind of younger people. And if you're a housing provider, maybe a specialist one, or others that has a lot of younger tenants, we know that younger tenants are more likely to move and more likely to fail in their tenancy in the first year. I can see why that can be an impact. And clearly the benefit cap that we already saw from Newcastle and Knight-Markiegi, how that can have quite big impacts for certain households.
Thank you, Adam. Okay, so I'm just going to try and serve the next poll, which should be coming up shortly, which is, which of the following changes to the benefit system do you think are of most concern to your customers? Okay, so let's have a look and see if the answers are any different. Okay, everybody's voting here now. So the previous poll was asking what is going to have the most impact on your organisation, which obviously is to do with the rental income coming in to the organisation. This is what's going to have the most impact to your residents or your customers. Okay, and again, everybody, there are lots of votes coming in. Thank you very much for voting. Again, if there is something else that we haven't covered, do let us know what that is. I'd be very interested to hear that. I think we've got the majority of the votes in. So last chance saloon. Fantastic, thank you. Okay, so what I want to do now is close that poll, and then I am going to share the results coming up on screen now. Okay, so any comments on that, Adam or Zoe?
Yeah, lovely. Interesting to see that there's more variety there, clearly. So direct payment of universal credit is still the biggest, but actually maybe kind of, hand in hand with the benefit cap changes. Clearly, if you are one of those households, and it can be hundreds and hundreds of households that are going to be have your benefits capped, that will be a huge impact. And that's allied with universal credit and direct payments, that could put more pressure on households. And I mentioned mental health earlier, because I think almost every single conversation I've had with frontline housing officers comes out mentioning mental health problems. So, I appreciate that the job of a housing officer, or, whatever you may call them, brand them, is much wider and is having to do social services, rent collection, allocating your properties, dealing with nuisance ASB, dealing with complaints. There's a lot on the plate, and I think that just kind of shows that. Now, also, there may be something else, that there are other aspects of the benefit system, and as we saw from one of the slides early on, there are a lot of changes, and the impact for different people will vary, and depending on, whether you have more working age, more pension age households, different aspects of the benefit system will affect you differently.
I think thank you very much to the person who, to John, who says that the something else was the freezing of the benefits for the next 4 years. Okay, great. Well, that I shall finish sharing the poll now. Thank you very much, everybody, for taking part. It's always very useful and very interesting to see, get feedback from you, and also for you to get feedback from your peers and other people in your sector as well. So I hope you found that useful and interesting, and certainly it is something that I know that Devon will, I shall feed that back to Devon, and he will maybe use that this afternoon when he's on Moneybox. Again, if you have anything that you would like Devon to raise on national radio, please do drop it into the panel box, and he'd be delighted to hear your feedback. Again, we were asking you what you think the biggest problem is facing your residents, your customers, when dealing with the benefit system. So I'm going to move on now. We're coming to the end of our webinar, and as I said, I promised I'd get you on your way by 11:30, and we're in good time to do that. And while I talk about the next steps, if there are any questions, please do let me know in the panel on the right-hand side, and I'll put them to Adam and to Zoe. Just while you're having any last thoughts on that, just to let you know that immediately after this webinar finishes, there'll be a very short automated survey that comes up onto your screen, and we'd welcome your feedback to let us know what you think of what we've talked about today. Also in that survey, you can have the opportunity to request the case study that we've written about the Your Homes Newcastle City Council work that Adam talked about earlier. There's more detail in that. And also, if you would like a copy of the welfare reform impact analysis, more detail, much more detail, of the analysis that Adam talked through, that's your chance to request that detail there. You can also set up a request for a data set demo to be set up for you and your colleagues individually for your organisation, and also a software demo as well. So we talked through some of the highlights of the software. But if you'd want to have a one-on-one demo, then that's your chance to put your hand up and request it. And just to let you know as well that we do take data privacy very important. It's very important to us. So just to reiterate that we do have permission from some of our clients to share their reports with other local authorities and organisations who may be similar in structure, demographics or strategic vision to you. So we have asked permission before we share anything with you. Okay, so Adam, Zoe, any last points to raise to the audience today before we finish up?
No, lovely. Thanks everybody for kind of taking part. I think it's interesting that the direct payment of universal credit is quite a key concern for yourself as organisations, and the impact that may have on kind of rent arrears across the organisation, and increasingly as universal credit is rolled out to more and more households. But actually that you think that alongside some of the other changes to benefits, the benefit cap in particular, is a key concern to some of your tenants. I'm sure Devon will be very interested to hear about that and to take that into the Money Box discussion on Radio 4 later today.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And just one final reminder to let you know that the handouts you can see in the panel on your right-hand side, particularly the welfare reform roadmap that Adam talked about at the very beginning of the session, you can download that as a PDF there to share with your colleagues and print out and pin up as well. It's correct as of yesterday. So all that remains is for me to say thank you very much to everybody. It's been great to have you joining us today. We have recorded the session and it will be made available to you along with the slide deck shortly. You can contact Adam directly, adam@policyandpractice.co.uk. Apologies to Zoe. If you wanted to email Zoe directly, it's Zoe, Z-O-E, @policyandpractice.co.uk. Sorry about that, Zoe. Adam's phone number is there on the screen for you, and indeed our generic email address is hello@policyandpractice. You can get hold of any of us there. So thank you very much everybody for your time today. All that remains is for me to say thank you, goodbye, and have a good rest of the day. Take care. Bye-bye.